Hi everyone, my name is Zook Avraham. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ZecOps. Some of you may know me as iHackBanMe on Twitter. Today we'll be speaking about how to keep safe from Pegasus and other mobile attacks from similar companies like NSO and other groups that we've been tracking. I see some folks wrote that there's no sound, but hopefully that's okay. Kevin and Megan, can you hear us? All right, perfect. So we'll go ahead and continue. So maybe just a brief background about my history. So I've been doing mobile security for many years. I've been doing security research in general almost my entire life. I'm based in California, and I worked at Samsung. I did security research, hacked their mobile devices. They allowed me to find vulnerabilities and then write the entire exploits. That was kind of fun. And then I founded Zimperium in 2010. I was 22 years old. And my second startup is ZecOps, where we're doing mobile XDR and we basically been tracking mobile attacks. We'll talk more about that later, and we've seen some common signs of attacks. We've also had the chance of analyzing the Pegasus NSO attacks before they were made public. Al Jazeera reached out to us in the summer of 2020, and we've analyzed their devices where we saw the attacks. We didn't attribute it to NSO at the time, but we knew the device was compromised, so we can basically share some insights that were not made public. Let's go ahead and start with the presentation. Today we're going to cover multiple topics, including why mobile is attracting to attackers, recent mobile attacks that we've seen, a bit more information about the NSO groups, what was found and what was not found. It's actually very interesting, as well as other things from how to keep safe, common signs of attacks, why mobile attacks are interesting and how widespread they are, as well as best practices. So let's continue. Maybe just before we quickly dive into Pegasus and NSO, why attackers are after mobile. So, many people say, I don't have any problems. I have 2FA, like all my accounts are secure because of the 2FA. I'm using my phone. But that's exactly it. Like, the problem is we are relying on our cell phones for the 2FA, but we are also relying on the same devices for authentication. So basically, these devices are both our first factor of authentication and second factor. For example, you're using your email 2FA on your phone as SMS or as Google Authenticator, and you're also logging in to the same email from your phone, meaning that if somebody hacked that phone, then they're able to access both the email and the 2FA tokens. So that's why really attackers love mobile. You get everything, both the access and the 2FA. Also interesting, there are a lot of remote attack surface. These devices are constantly connected. They have Wi-Fi, they have baseband. So basically, these devices are the perfect target. A lot of them are automatically processing things, whether if it's SMS, MMS, FaceTime, WhatsApp, and whatnot. But the thing is, if you compare these devices, mobile devices, to, let's say, computers from early 2000s, then the only difference is the name. So people used to call server-side bugs. Now it's called zero clicks. So it's really the same thing. Without interaction, you're able to hack into a remote device because it processes either packets or content from the attackers. Now, another interesting aspect is mobile attacks are scalable. So what do we mean by that? So, maybe we can say iOS is relatively secure, Android is relatively secure. But if really somebody invested, let's say, three researchers over a period of 6 months to hack the latest version of iOS, the capabilities of that is really endless, because you can literally hack about 1 billion devices that are running on the same version or similar versions, using the same vulnerabilities, assuming they're completely remote. So this is why it's so powerful and it's attracted companies like NSO to be very popular. Some of the recent mobile attacks, and this is just from 1 week of observation at ZecOps, we've seen a boot ROM exploit. So this particular was Checkmate that we've seen last week. So somebody left their phone unattended, and another person grabbed it for a few hours and returned it after they maybe imaged the phone or whatnot, but they had full access into the device. So we've seen that. We've seen compromised devices. We're also seeing log tampering. Since then, we've also seen a 0-day that we are currently looking into. So a lot of attacks on mobile. It's definitely attracting a lot of attackers. And this is just over a period of 1 week. So as you can imagine, our day-to-day is very, very exciting and very interesting. There are just so many attacks out there. And in the past, if we thought, it's only targeting like the top level executives, etc., we've seen now that it's targeting their staff. We've seen like attacks targeting non-senior at all staff, like people who do ops for executives and people that are surrounded by them. We've also seen attacks that are at scale. So basically hacking the MDM system and then deploying software to everyone that the attackers want to get details from. And they've also been doing that because they want microphone access, so that kind of makes sense. You kind of get thousands of microphones from the same company or the same organization all at once. It's really cool from a technical point of view and from attacker's point of view, but it's really a nightmare from the defensive side of view. So let's talk a bit about Pegasus and NSO. So Pegasus has been around a lot in the news recently, and they have capabilities of infecting devices remotely. And depending on the time, sometimes they have 0 clicks, sometimes it's 1 clicks, but it's actually really hard to defend against. I mean, if you get a link that says unsubscribe, and most people would just want to unsubscribe to not get these spam messages, and simply somebody would be hacking into their device. So we've seen that from this group. We have seen full 0 clicks used by this group. We've seen deception capabilities by this group and log tampering too. And so we've been tracking them for a while. The currently patched vulnerability is actually not the same as the one that they were using, at least not what we've seen on the Al Jazeera devices at the time. And we actually caught them through other ways, but we might talk about that later. So what are the implications before we do a deeper dive into that? What are the implications of a hacked phone by Pegasus? Basically, they have capabilities from seeing your camera, getting your pictures, videos, SMS, 2FA tokens, microphone, GPS location, all of the things that you would expect from a compromised phone, as well as what's perceived to be encrypted content. Once the phone is hacked, there isn't really such a thing as encryption. I mean, if you just take a screenshot, you get the actual content the user sees, as well as you can also decrypt many of the things on the device. So end-to-end encryption doesn't really work if your phone is compromised. It's important to know that. But let's talk about what was found. So there was attacks on journalists and media organizations. We can confirm that too. We've seen that on Al Jazeera. We can confirm the phones that we were checking, some of them were definitely compromised. There was also a list of 50,000 potential targets of Pegasus. It's unclear currently if that list contains devices that were that all of them were compromised, or was it just for tracking, or is it related or not? So there's some denial coming from NSO group on this list, but I mean, what can we expect from an offensive security group? So other things that we've seen, there was one vulnerability, only one, that was patched as a result of these attacks. We wrote potential vulnerability because it's unclear if this is actually the way they entered into the device. But it's only one, which is interesting because in an attack, especially on iPhones, you need multiple vulnerabilities as part of the exploit chain to fully compromise a device remotely, to fully take over a device remotely. And only one vulnerability was patched, meaning that the attackers really have the entire chain for themselves, and they only need to replace one vulnerability in order to continue their operations. So everything that was published, including IOCs, I mean, that's meaningless for NSO. They can really replace that within minutes. Same for website like DNS, like CNC servers, that can all be replaced very fast. The vulnerability that was patched, I mean, if that's what they were using, yes, that definitely caused some damage to them. But as far as we understand, the current standard in the offensive security market, which we've been tracking, is 3 backup vulnerabilities to every part of the exploit chain, meaning that really 0 damage was done to NSO as a result of this discovery. So what can we do? We can actually keep monitoring these guys and keep tracking their activities, is also finding if devices were compromised by them or not. And we definitely have those capabilities right now, but it's also at the same time not trivial at all. If you want to read more information about this, so both Citizen Labs and Amnesty did an excellent job of writing and documenting these vulnerabilities. There's also a blog at ZecOps where we published some of the information that was found during the analysis of the Pegasus attacks on Al Jazeera devices when they worked with us to analyze those devices. So we have some more information there about some of the events that we have seen. So that's basically this part. We are not going to repeat anything that is written in Amnesty's blog. We're not going to repeat anything that's written in Citizen Labs blog. I mean, for that, those resources are already publicly available. So there is no point in doing that. So let's talk about what was not found. The entire chain that Pegasus used was not found. Only a single vulnerability, maybe. But really, there is no information on how they bypassed the ASLR. There is no information about the kernel exploit that the attackers used. Anything about other vulnerabilities that they're using, backup vulnerabilities. Also, how common it was. There is a list of 50,000 people, but is it really related to their list of targets, or are there other lists? Are there other targets? So basically, more things were not found compared to what we think was found. Are there other companies like NSO? So NSO is very popular. I mean, it was originally a negative press for them once they were caught by Citizen Labs and Link and Lookout in 2016, 2015. But it was actually a very good PR for them. I mean, it was bad because their customers didn't want them to be in the news. But for them, it was actually really good. Like, business was booming afterwards. They got very popular. A lot of clients saw their name in the news that they have those capabilities. So as a result of that, they actually gained more clients. So this is one of the reasons of why we do not publish the names of companies. Once we are able to do attribution, Another one is because attribution is actually extremely hard, and it's almost never 100%. But even once we get to 100% attribution, we're refraining from naming the exact companies because it actually makes them like a free PR to these guys. So yeah, this is one of the reasons why we're not doing that. But these are some companies that are already well known and that been doing offensive security operations. So besides NSO, there are companies like Variant, like Quadream, like Psygroup, Toka, and many others just in Israel. But there are also others in Italy, in Singapore, in Australia, in the US. I mean, there are probably about 100 different offensive security companies, maybe even more, and many of them have mobile capabilities. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. And while we are constantly hearing about NSO, there are actually many other actors involved, including individual sellers of exploits, including exploits brokerage firms. I mean, it's a huge industry, a lot of vulnerabilities, and the current systems that we are currently using and we think are secure, actually not that secure. So that's the primary challenge in looking into mobile attacks. So let's do a deeper dive into iOS 14.8. iOS 14.8 patched two vulnerabilities that were exploited in the wild. Now let's talk first about the definition of exploited in the wild. Once we found an attack that was exploited in the wild with a mail zero click back in 2020, Apple refused to write that it was exploited in the wild. They claim that there is no evidence for that. I mean, what we've seen was actually pretty clear to us, and we insist that it was exploited in the wild, but they didn't want to write it down. So really not every vulnerability that was patched, that was exploited, they're actually writing it down. If they do, then they're under some pressure or under some exact evidence that somebody was able to obtain, whether if in this case it was Citizens Labs that were able to obtain the exact file, or in another case on the same version, an anonymous researcher. So who is this anonymous researcher? Is that like a real person? Is it a company? Is it a government? Or is it something else? We don't know. We also don't know how many people were targeted by Pegasus and NSO, and also we don't know about this particular anonymous researcher that published this vulnerability. Like, I mean, we're just seeing a WebKit vulnerability that was patched. What about the kernel exploit? What about the chain? Is it the other vulnerabilities that were patched in previous versions or not? How many people? What are the IOCs? I mean, we're really getting zero transparency on attacks in the wild. And security without transparency is challenging, to say the least. It's very problematic to be claiming that you're the most secure platform without actually being transparent about attacks. It definitely shares a wrong light on the platform. So hopefully things will get better. We see already that iOS 15 added some additional security features that will make it easier to find attacks, but at the same time, it's not there yet. So like iOS 15, I wouldn't call it secure. I wouldn't call the latest Android version secure. And it's mostly not because they're not actually good. They're doing a great job, both Google and Apple, but because of the lack of visibility and the lack of capabilities of defenders to do things. So essentially, every time you check a phone, it's really fighting an uphill battle where attackers have the advantage. They get kernel access and you don't. And that's really the entire story of analyzing mobile attacks. So you really need to be very creative on what you do and how you analyze mobile devices. So how common it is? Let's actually only examine the cases where Apple themselves wrote that this was patched as a result of an exploit. We can see anything from, iOS 14.4, 14.5.1, 14.7, 14.7.1, 14.8. Like almost in every single version of iOS, there is vulnerabilities that were patched as a result of attacks in the wild. So there are many, many other vulnerabilities that we have zero information about that are actively exploited. And going back to my first statement about mobile attacks are being scalable, many of these actors have capabilities of really infecting tens, if not hundreds of millions of devices at the push of a button and as a result of just running a script. And we really have no guarantees that that didn't already happen. I mean, we've seen Xcode Ghost that infected 50 million devices, even more than that. Many years ago, that was, I think, 2014, 2015. So we have seen that already, like an attack, indirect attack on tens of millions of devices. It didn't really capture much, but nobody captured the stage 2 of this. So it's unclear what was the exact damage. But we are seeing attackers heavily invested in attacking iOS users. And of course, the same also goes to Android. What we've seen, and this is actually a screenshot from our platform of one of the devices. We've seen local privilege escalation exploit attempts multiple times with NSO. We have seen the devices was acting in the wrong way. Since then, we've been starting to collect additional information from the devices that actively helps us to find them way easier in a deterministic way. But I would say these devices were absolutely compromised. It was very clear to us within moments the system notified Al Jazeera that these devices were compromised. So we actually didn't rely on any IOCs that were published later. Here you can see the process name RS belongs to NSO. This is a further rescan of that device down the road. But we actually didn't use any IOCs to determine that this device was fully compromised. And one of the things you can see in the ZecOps blog is actually covering one of the kernel panics that happened on that device when the attackers tried to add a sandbox policy and then it got rebooted. So some of the signs that we have seen on NSO targeted devices as well as others really relates to some things that every user can see. For example, problems accessing microphone or camera. That's a very common one. No updates. That's also a common one. Like, iOS 15 is already out or iOS 14.8 is already out, but your automatic updates are not working, or that if you click on it and try to update, you just can't. And that's really something that we have seen very common. We've also seen sudden reboots. I would say the number one indicator of attacks is probably sudden reboots. So absolutely recommending to pay more attention to these. If you want to do a forced reboot, we'll get to that later, but there's some ways that you can revoke any attackers that don't have persistency from your device. And you can do it by forcing a reboot, but if they have a 0 click, then that's meaningless because they can basically reinfect you after you reboot. So there are many ways. Other things that are not all of these, by the way, necessarily point to an attack. For example, you can have your device heating without an attack. You can have keyboard delays without an attack. Maybe your battery is low, so that like if you're on 1% or 2%, that could also happen. Reboot loop is actually not very common without an attack. Unrecognized profiles, MDMs, that's also uncommon. Unexpected pin code pop-ups in a different design than what you usually see. That's also very suspicious and very shady. So just pay attention to that, and I'm sure you'll see stuff. We've also seen recently a case where the camera was open when no other application was open. So you can see the green light. that's a visual indicator on the device. You can see the green light, but then there is no app using the camera. So that's a nice visual indicator that every user can spot. Some best practices on how you can basically make your device safer. So update to the latest version. I mean, that works. It doesn't work against 0 days, but it's still definitely most recommended for most users. There are so many vulnerabilities that were patched in iOS 15. So if you're still running on iOS 14.7 or something like that, any semi-sophisticated attackers can use that, the vulnerabilities that were patched, in order to infiltrate into your device using N days. So that's actually very recommended to update to iOS 15. We also recommend doing hard reboot once a day. I think that's fair to do that. The way you do hard reboot is basically clicking on iOS button, the volume up, then the volume down, then long press on power, and the device would basically shut down immediately. That's very recommended if the attackers don't have any persistency and they just sent you a link and somehow got your device to be compromised. That's your way, easy way out. There is also the ability of recording app activity. You can do it once a week. For some reason, Apple just released this new feature. I'll go back to that later. You can do it simply by going into privacy, record app activity, and then turn it on. For some reason, they don't allow you to do more than 7 days. I don't know why. And I'm not sure if they allow this to do from third-party apps. It's kind of lockdown system, which slightly helps the ability to secure these devices, but it is what it is. And hopefully that will change one day. We're definitely seeing a positive change. So with every new version, some other features open up and some other information is available for analysis. But I would still be encouraging Apple to open up memory for inspections, because we are seeing attackers that are using fileless infections, like in-memory attacks. And the second one is full file system read-only access. I think that would also help these types of attacks. For example, if we had this capability with Pegasus and NSO, we would have been easily able to extract the payload within moments of the attack. So in a way, not having these capabilities hurts the platform more than it helps it, because the users were left exposed to these vulnerabilities for more than a year, because it's so locked down, and not being able to obtain the exploits is kind of hurting the platform. Don't leave the phone alone. So basically, we spoke about the boot ROM exploit that we've detected last week. That's not recommended to leave it like in the hotel for a few hours or once you're traveling, etc. So keep that in mind. Some basic features like enable PIN code and face recognition. It's going to make anyone who has physical access life a bit harder, especially if it's newer versions than iPhone X, which doesn't have a publicly known boot ROM exploit. And then notice the signs of compromise. So, for example, what we said: lack of updates, sudden reboots, device heating, things like that. Camera turning on without any app using it. Those are common signs that attackers constantly do, and every user can basically see those. Other things: avoid installing apps from non-trusted developers and apps. Great, that's very common. Don't connect to public networks. Also very recommended. And activate 2FA wherever possible. These again are the steps of doing the recording app activity. So go to settings, privacy, record app activity, and then turn it on. And about once a week, save it and save the log file. You can also send it to us. We can analyze those as well as the actual devices. In terms of what we do at ZecOps, so we've been tracking mobile attackers, and we've been tracking zero-day usage in the wild for a while now. We've been protecting VIPs, executives, head of states, head of armies. So we've seen all sorts of weird stuff coming from the top attackers of this world. And we've gathered a lot of experience on analyzing mobile devices. If you guys want to check your phones using our software, we'll be more than happy to collaborate. We've already released our mobile DFIR for both iOS and Android. We're about to release our mobile XDR for iOS in about a month or so. And you can contact us here. There is also a special discount for the webinar attendees. So that's possible too. So there's a sign up button you can simply click on. It will be available throughout the next hour or so. So feel free to click on the sign up button. We'll provide a free trial to approved companies and governments. Other than that, I think that's about it. Feel free to follow me on Twitter or on the company, so at ZecOps or at iHackBanMe. Are there any questions? Yes, I think there are. So let's see. Was Pegasus targeted to a specific mobile device, to specific mobile OS, or was it random? I'm not sure what you mean by random, but they're capable of they were capable of hacking every iOS version at a time. So that was particularly for iOS. They also have Android capabilities, but in a way, Android's weakest feature, which is its fragmentation, is also making it harder for attackers to scale their attacks. So once you have different Samsungs and they all have different operating system and different versions and different memory layout and different chipsets that were manufactured in different factories, that actually makes the attacker's life way harder from a QA perspective and from porting the vulnerabilities perspective. But in this particular case, it was iOS. It wasn't random. I mean, they must have known the user was using iOS because it was a zero click. You simply send the MMS or SMS, infect the device, and then basically they got access, so it wasn't random at all. Pegasus was prevalent in India too. Was the what was the second question? I think it was deleted. Yes. All right. I missed the. Okay. Pegasus was prevalent in India too. Was the Al Jazeera fiasco before that? I mean, you know, they have customers. We don't know exactly everyone were targeted, but we're definitely seeing attacks either by Pegasus or by other attackers. So iOS attacks are definitely common, Android as well. Mobile devices are, I would, in my opinion, are currently the number one targeted devices. So it's really just all of the above. They targeted India before and after, so it's we need to get confirmations about India, but like I would say it's very common there too. That's my my guess. Does the forensic software can detect some kind of artifacts left by Pegasus? Yes, absolutely. They're leaving a lot of artifacts. They're making a lot of mistakes, and these mistakes allows to detect them. Also, they're trying very hard to delete logs and tamper with logs. They're not doing a perfect job there, and we have abilities of detecting them in a deterministic and heuristic way. Volume up and volume down before using the reboot button. Any specific reason? Yes. that basically hints the operating system to do a force reboot and not a regular, a force shutdown and not a regular one. We need to check if this is, software proof, but the basic recommendation is that it forces the operating system to shut down without any ability to prevent it from doing that. But that's yet to be checked. Do you think the black phone is an option to avoid Pegasus? I honestly don't think any phone is really bulletproof. So that also includes black phone or any other custom phones that are available out there. What it can do is make the attacker's life harder because it requires custom work in order to hack a device that is not very common. So in a way, basically it also comes back to the previous statement that says it's easier to attack an iPhone than Android simply because it's more scalable, not because it's less secure. So the same goes to black phone. It's very niche device that not many people have. So unless if they have a specific targets that a customer is willing to spend additional money on porting vulnerabilities to that phone, then only then they will do that. But are they capable? Yeah, absolutely. What is the mechanism used by Pegasus and how we get prevention? The mechanism that was used was vulnerability in parsing PDFs. At least that was made public. We've seen other vulnerabilities too. But what can you do from prevention perspective? I would say continuous monitoring, look into signs of compromise, the things I mentioned earlier. We can also help you to analyze devices on a continuous fashion. And I would say prevention is a very strict word. I mean, when you're dealing with somebody that has a zero click, you can't really prevent it, whether if it's on PC or on mobile, it's the same. The only way to prevent somebody from infecting you with a vulnerability that was not patched is either not trigger that vulnerable function. For example, if it's a link, don't click on the link, you don't get infected. But if it's a zero click and like you can't not click on a link if it's a zero click, right? You get infected immediately. So in that case, the only way to fight back is to patch the vulnerabilities or to block access from the organization controls. So basically you have two ways. The first one is continuously detect if the phone is compromised. If it is compromised and you find a vulnerability, report it to Apple or Google, and then that way you can prevent the attackers from reinfecting your devices. But you can also disable access to corporate assets as soon as you find these vulnerabilities were exploited in your environment. So it's like a two ways to counter zero-click attackers. All right, so that was answered. Black phone was already answered. All right, let's see what else. It's a bit the order is a bit confusing. If we found Pegasus infected devices, how we can remove that kind of malicious software? You can reach out to us and we can help you do that. But it's in a similar way, like if it's a zero click, then the way of doing that is reporting the vulnerability. But first of all, you need to make sure that this device were actually compromised by Pegasus and not by something else. How do you stop Pegasus if a phone is attacked besides updating iOS? Same thing as I mentioned earlier, monitor devices, see if there was any suspicious activity, analyze the events related to the suspicious activity, look for the files that were planted in the file system, or look for errors that happened as a result of them. Is Pegasus software outside of NSO control today? Yes, it was always outside of their control. They're basically selling the software to end clients, and then they're putting the responsibility on the end clients to use it on fair targets. Each country has different definition of what is a legit target. So in some of them, they can call somebody who is, not against the local government like a terrorist, and then that's fine, but they can also claim that they're doing good with that software. I guess it's a mix. But it's outside of their control of who is using it. It's in their control of how many licenses are being used, but at the same time, they're selling it to sophisticated buyers. Some of them are sophisticated. So, for example, if they sell it to a government that has a lot of researchers, and those researchers are going to attack the test device, they can reverse engineer the exploits that they used, and then it's fully out of their control because they can repurpose that exploit and use it on as many devices that they want. So in a way, it's fully out of control, in my opinion. All right, so we answered that. I think we answered all of the questions. What iOS is necessary to record app activity? That's iOS 15. There were cases where miss WhatsApp call installing spyware, which wasn't getting detected by many vendors. Is ZecOps available as a product for personal use to common people for a yearly subscription, or do you deal on commercial bulk basis? We are only doing commercial and government right now, but we may open that up later for more people. Where are you based, Ian? Maybe we'll do it by geography, so it would be interesting to know. Running iOS 14.8, went to settings, there is no app activity, correct, because that's only on iOS 15. All right, so I think we answered all of them. Any other questions left that were not answered? Okay, if it's working on some server or some operator, can we trace back, or can we change its root directory or date is forwarding till the help we get? Round, I am not sure I'm following your question. If you can clarify, that'll be great. Ian, we are currently not doing consumer in India, but it may change down the road. Is it known if all of NSO clients are governments? I don't know if all of the customers are governments, but does it say anything? Does it mean anything? Every government has a different standard on how they want to attack people, and they have, they can say somebody who's in a different political party is an enemy of the country, and then basically hack them, right? Like, is that fair? Is that really helping the national security, or is it helping people to remain in power? That's a question worth asking ourselves. Are you seeing more focus on individuals or classes of users, company phones, or particular employers? So we've been checking really high-end and top people in the world, that some of them are well-known and we all recognize. And we've seen a lot of attacks. But at the same time, we've also seen attacks on not just the C-level, we've seen it on HR managers. Why would an HR manager be a target for a zero-click or a one-click? It really remains, it depends on what the attackers were looking for. We've also seen attacks that were widespread, so basically infecting many devices in the same organization, tapping into the microphone of many people, and then that's about it. Good source of forensics artifacts related to Pegasus. So basically, just to the previous question, Jim, I would say all of the above. Of course, we've seen the ratio more towards executives or people that are very interesting to attackers, but being very interesting to attackers depends on who the attacker is. So some attackers would be only wanting the CEO's microphone, and some would actually say, we have these capabilities of tapping people's microphone. We are not putting analysts just to listen to people. It's all automatic, like speech to text, index in a database, have keywords. So why not just do it all in the entire company? So from their perspective, they're also automating their operations. Good source of forensics artifacts. You can read the Amnesty's blog. It has a lot of artifacts. Same with Citizen Labs. Personally, I would say the chances of finding Pegasus based on these artifacts is extremely low, especially after the event was made public. Because changing a process name is not an issue for these guys. They already done it within hours of the initial publication. What's the best anti-malware for individuals in your opinion? Gregory, are you using iOS or Android? Round, can we trace back the owner of spyware and can we change its path where the data is forwarding? It really depends on the malware, depends on the spyware, depends on attribution, depends on a lot of things. So my answer would be it depends. Anthony Harvey, have you seen this being used to control the phone and impersonate the target, or just collect intel? We have definitely seen impersonation of the target. We have seen calls coming in from a compromised phone to the spouse. So we've seen a lot of stuff that were actually related to pretending to be the infected device. What else? Can we trace back the owner? We've already answered that. So I think we answered everything. A lot of questions today. Great audience. Any other questions? All right. So if you guys want to give a shot to ZecOps software to check in your organizations, we'll be more than happy to help qualified organizations and government. Thank you very much for being a great audience with great questions. Thank you, Jim. And Megan, back to you, I guess.